The kingdom of Elarion was living in a time of great anticipation. The king, now elderly and without direct heirs, needed to choose a worthy successor to the throne. For years, he had ruled with justice, always seeking the well-being of his people. But he knew that after his passing, the fate of the kingdom would depend on who took his place. On a golden morning, the king summoned 3 promising young men to the great hall of the castle. They were Dario, a shrewd young merchant who had already amassed considerable wealth, Cedric, an ambitious warrior and brilliant strategist, and Elias, a humble scribe's apprentice known for his thirst for knowledge and generous heart. The 3 knelt before the throne as the king observed them with wise eyes. Then, he spoke. "You have been chosen because you have demonstrated remarkable qualities. But what makes a king worthy of his people? Is it wealth? Power? Or wisdom?" The young men exchanged glances, unsure of how to respond. The king continued. "To decide who will be my successor, I will give each of you a choice. In front of you, there are 3 doors. Each represents a path that may lead you to the throne. You may choose only one. Behind the first door lies limitless wealth, gold, jewels, and fertile lands, all for those who wish to rule with abundance. Behind the second door lies absolute power, loyal armies, control over the laws, and unquestioned obedience, for those who wish to rule with strength. Finally, behind the third door lies wisdom, knowledge of the ancients, secrets of the human soul, an understanding of life, and the true meaning of ruling." The king paused before concluding. "Return tomorrow with your decisions. Choose wisely, for your choice will determine not only your destiny but that of the entire kingdom." The 3 young men rose and left the hall in silence. Each felt the weight of the decision on his shoulders. Night fell over Elarion, and with it, a restless doubt grew in their hearts. That night, the 3 young men could hardly sleep. The choice they would make the next morning would not only define their own destinies, but also the future of the kingdom. Dario, the merchant, lay on his silk bed, but his mind was restless. Wealth, that had always been his greatest desire. Since childhood, he had learned that gold bought comfort, influence, and respect. With limitless riches, he could do whatever he wanted. But a doubt whispered in his mind, what if it was all fleeting? Even so, he couldn't imagine choosing another path. Cedric, the warrior, ran his fingers over the blade of his sword. He had no doubts. Power was what shaped the destiny of men. From a young age, he had trained tirelessly to be strong, to lead, and to conquer. With the kingdom's army under his command, he could unite lands, expand borders, and make history. "The world belongs to the strong," he thought to himself. Elias, on the other hand, sat under a tree in the castle garden, gazing at the stars. He had neither great wealth nor combat skills, but he had always sought to understand the human heart. Wisdom was a treasure that could neither be stolen nor lost. But would it be enough to make someone a good king? He wasn't sure, but his heart told him this was the right path. As the sun rose over the kingdom, the 3 stood before the king. "The time has come to choose," the monarch said, his voice firm yet calm. "Dario, which door do you choose?" The young merchant stepped forward. "I choose the first door, Your Majesty. With infinite wealth, I can ensure prosperity and abundance for the kingdom." The king nodded and gestured for Dario to step aside. "Cedric, what about you?" The warrior held his gaze steady. "I choose the second door. With absolute power, I can protect and expand the kingdom, ensuring security and respect." Once again, the king nodded before turning to Elias. "And you, Elias?" The young man took a deep breath before answering. "I choose the third door, Your Majesty. I believe wisdom is the only thing that can truly guide a ruler toward the well-being of his people." This time, the king did not respond immediately. His eyes studied Elias intently, as if trying to see into his soul. Then, he smiled slightly. "So be it," he said. "You will follow the path you have chosen. Return when you have learned what each choice has to teach." With that, the three were led to their respective journeys. Dario was taken to a grand hall filled with gold and jewels, Cedric was greeted by an army ready to obey his command, and Elias set off on a long journey, with no gold, no soldiers, only the promise of learning. Each believed they had made the best choice. But time would reveal the consequences of their decisions. Dario was in awe as he stepped into the grand hall that had been granted to him. Piles of gold, gleaming jewels, and chests overflowing with coins filled the room. For the first time in his life, he felt like he had everything he had ever wanted. In the first few months, his wealth seemed endless. He bought land, built palaces, and surrounded himself with people who praised his generosity. Nobles from across the kingdom sought his friendship, merchants offered him the finest goods, and artists composed songs celebrating his greatness. Dario believed he had made the best choice. Over time, however, he began to realize that wealth came at a price. Friends became demanding, always asking for more favors and benefits. Investments that once seemed promising turned out to be traps, as many were only interested in taking advantage of his fortune. Each day brought new problems, new debts, and unexpected betrayals. He tried to stay in control, but the pressure was overwhelming. He needed more money to sustain his luxurious lifestyle. He began making risky deals, trusting allies who seemed loyal. But as his fortune started to dwindle, those same people vanished. One day, one of the men he trusted most ran off with a large portion of his wealth. Soon after, creditors came knocking at his door, demanding payment. His servants, who once treated him with respect, now looked at him with contempt. Dario realized, too late, that his wealth had never brought him true friends. Those who flattered him had only been there for the gold, and now that it was gone, he was alone. With no options left, he sold his last possessions and left the city, feeling the weight of failure in his chest. His choice had given him everything he had ever dreamed of, but in the end, all that remained was a painful emptiness. As he wandered aimlessly, he wondered what might have happened if he had chosen differently. But now, there was no going back. Cedric stepped into the grand hall, where dozens of warriors awaited him. Gleaming armor, sharpened swords, and disciplined soldiers stood ready to obey his every command. For the first time, he felt he had absolute control over his own life and the destiny of the kingdom. In the first few months, he imposed strict rules and expanded his army. He conquered neighboring territories, increased his influence, and became feared by all. Political leaders revered him, generals respected him, and citizens spoke his name with both fear and admiration. He believed his choice had been the wisest. But over time, something began to change. Ruling through fear ensured obedience, but no one dared to speak the truth. Advisors only told him what he wanted to hear, soldiers feared him more than they admired him, and the people lived in silence, never expressing happiness or gratitude. Cedric began to suspect betrayals. Soldiers who once seemed loyal started acting with hesitation. Some nights, he woke up startled, convinced that someone would try to take his power. He increased surveillance, enforced harsher laws, and imposed crueler punishments for any sign of disloyalty. But the more he tried to maintain control, the more it seemed to slip away. The fear he had instilled turned against him. The very generals who once supported him began conspiring in secret. The people, who had once remained silent, started to rebel. Then came the betrayal. On a cold night, as he slept in his fortified chambers, his own guards opened the castle gates to his enemies. When he woke, he realized he was alone. Not a single soldier remained by his side. He was captured and exiled to distant lands, where he was forced to live as an ordinary man, without power and without allies. Sitting by the edge of a river, he reflected on his choice. Power had given him dominion over everything and everyone, but it had never given him anything real. Without loyalty, without love, without friends, he realized that, in the end, he was weaker than ever. Now, with nothing left, he wondered if there was still time to start over. Elias left the castle with no riches and no army. He carried only a simple cloak, a small notebook, and a sincere desire to learn. His path was uncertain, but in his heart, he knew that wisdom was the only choice that could lead him to something greater. In the first few months, he traveled from village to village, observing people, listening to their stories, and helping however he could. He worked alongside farmers, learned from elders, and shared knowledge with those he met along the way. One day, he encountered an old hermit who told him something he would never forget: he who wishes to lead must first learn to serve. Elias reflected on those words and dedicated himself even more to his learning. Over time, people began to listen to him. Men and women sought his advice. His presence brought peace, and his wisdom provided answers to those who were lost. Unlike Dario and Cedric, Elias did not seek followers, yet people came to respect him for who he was, not for what he possessed. As the years passed, he became a respected sage, but he never lost his humility. He understood that true greatness did not lie in wealth or power, but in the ability to understand life and guide others with kindness and justice. Then, one day, he received an unexpected message. The king was calling him back to the castle. The moment of truth had arrived. With a calm heart and a clear mind, Elias began his journey back to the kingdom, unaware that he was about to discover the true purpose of his choice. Years had passed, and the king of Elarion, now weakened by age, waited anxiously for the return of the three young men. He knew that each of their choices would bring profound lessons, and that only one of them would be ready to succeed him on the throne. Dario arrived first. His hunched posture and distant gaze revealed his defeat. His once luxurious clothing was now worn and dirty. Kneeling before the king, he spoke with a trembling voice. "Your Majesty, I chose wealth, believing it would bring me respect and happiness. But I learned that gold does not buy loyalty, nor does it fill the emptiness of the soul. When I lost my fortune, I also lost everything I thought I had gained. Now, I am nothing but a man with nothing." The king listened in silence and nodded slightly. Shortly after, Cedric entered the hall. His expression carried bitterness and regret. Though he still tried to stand tall, his face revealed that he had lost far more than just his position as a leader. "I chose power, Your Majesty, believing that strength would secure my reign. I commanded armies, imposed my will, and was feared. But fear does not create true loyalty. When I needed allies, I was abandoned. Now I understand that ruling without wisdom is like building a castle on sand." The king sighed and turned his gaze toward the entrance of the hall. Then, Elias arrived. He wore no noble garments, nor did he bear symbols of wealth or authority. Yet his presence radiated peace and confidence. His steps were steady, and his eyes reflected serenity. He knelt before the king and spoke with humility. I chose wisdom, your majesty, and my journey taught me that nothing is more valuable than understanding life and serving others. I did not seek riches, yet I learned the value of generosity. I did not seek power, yet I earned the respect of those I met along the way. I discovered that a true leader does not rule for himself, but for the good of his people. The king smiled, pleased. His gaze moved between the three young men, and with a solemn voice, he gave his judgment. Each of you followed the path you chose and reaped its lessons. Dario, you have learned that wealth is fleeting when not guided by values. Cedric, you now understand that power without wisdom leads to ruin. But Elias, you have discovered the true meaning of leadership. The hall fell silent. Everyone awaited the king's decision. With effort, he rose to his feet and declared, "Elias will be my successor. For he who seeks wisdom finds not only the right path for himself, but for all who place their trust in him." Dario and Cedric bowed their heads, accepting the judgment. They felt no envy, for they knew their choices had led them to this moment. Elias, however, did not celebrate. He simply closed his eyes for a brief moment, feeling the weight of the responsibility now resting on his shoulders. His reign would not be one of luxury or conquest, but of justice, learning, and compassion. And so, the fate of the kingdom was sealed. The king looked at the three young men kneeling before him and took a deep breath. His time on the throne was coming to an end, and now, at last, he could reveal the true purpose behind their choices. You believed you were choosing a reward. But in reality, you were choosing what would define who you would become. Wealth, power, and wisdom are not gifts, they are paths. And each path leads to a different destiny. He turned to Dario and continued, "You sought wealth, believing it would bring happiness and respect. But you learned that gold can disappear, and those who seem like friends are often only seeking personal gain. A man's true worth is not in what he owns, but in what he shares." Dario nodded, tears welling in his eyes. For the first time, he truly understood the lesson. The king then looked at Cedric. "You chose power, believing it would bring control and glory. But you learned that a leader without wisdom and love becomes a prisoner of his own ambition. True power is not in strength, but in the trust people place in you." Cedric lowered his head. Everything the king said made sense. Now, he understood that ruling through fear could never create a lasting reign. Finally, the king turned to Elias. "You chose wisdom, even without knowing where that path would lead. And in seeking it, you found wealth in knowledge and power in truth. You realized that the greatest leader is not the one who wishes to be served, but the one who serves others." The old monarch paused and looked around at everyone in the hall. His voice echoed strong and clear. "Let this story be a lesson for the entire kingdom. For he who chooses wealth may end up poor. He who chooses power may end up alone. But he who chooses wisdom will never be lost." With a slow and solemn gesture, he removed the crown from his head and placed it before Elias. "From this day forward, you shall be the new king of Elarion. And you will rule not with treasures or armies, but with justice and wisdom." The hall remained silent for a moment until a murmur of approval began to spread. The people, who had been watching in anticipation, now cheered with joy. Dario and Cedric stepped forward toward Elias. There was humility in their eyes, not resentment. They knew they had learned their lessons the hard way, but they also knew they could start anew. Elias stood, lifted the crown, but did not place it on his head immediately. Instead, he looked at the people and spoke with calm authority. The king has given us a great lesson today. True wealth is not in gold. True power is not in fear. True leadership is not about imposing, but about setting an example. I will rule this kingdom with justice, and I hope that each of you will also seek wisdom in your own journey. The crowd erupted in celebration. From that day on, the kingdom of Elarion entered a new era, one not driven by conquest or riches, but by the pursuit of knowledge and true happiness. Dario found a new purpose in helping those in need, using his experience to rebuild his life in a more just way. Cedric dedicated himself to protecting the kingdom differently, becoming a leader respected not for fear, but for his honor. And Elias, with humility and wisdom, became the most beloved King Elarion had ever known. And so, this story teaches us that every choice we make shapes the path we walk. The brightest path is not always the right one, and the hardest one is not always the wrong one. But if we choose wisdom, we will never be alone. This story reminds us that even in the most difficult moments, true wealth lies within us. And you, which path would you choose? If this message touched your heart, leave a like and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to the channel for more stories that inspire and transform lives. Stay blessed, and see you in the next video.